Hello, Grin Grimsley here, coming to you live as a recording from the morgue. Because as I've always said, just because you're dead, it doesn't mean you shouldn't go on living. And so with that in mind, let's get on with a brand new episode of Art with Grin. I think I'm going to change the background color here to make it a little bit more lighter. In the previous video, when I was watching it back, it looked all a bit too light. Everything was a bit white and glary. But, hopefully this balances out a bit. It is of course October, and so this is going to be an October themed video, making it nice and spooky. And just to double check, yes, we are definitely recording this time, because just before I recorded 17 minutes of this, and well, let's just say, though I recorded the audio, we didn't get any drawings of it. So what are we doing today? Well, since it is the spooky season, I'm going to keep this video nice and on theme, and we're going to be drawing spooky classic horror monsters. They're not going to be any specific horror monster, well, maybe, but probably just going to be your generic ones. So, we're going to start off with a werewolf. I'm not saying it's Wolfman because I don't want Universal kicking down my door, but it's going to be a werewolf nonetheless. Let's start again with it because that one's looking a bit, well, I didn't quite like it. If you did watch the previous video where I was drawing Star Wars ships, then thank you so much for watching it. It got a really good reception, and that's why I'm doing this video now. So much appreciated if you watched and enjoyed and liked that one, and also major appreciation to all of the kind comments on it. They were passed on to me, and I was very happy with it. And hopefully you guys will like this one just as much, or at least in a similar degree. It is, of course, something that I'm not very good at, both drawing and talking while I draw. So this series is it's an interesting challenge for me. I constantly get sidetracked about what I'm trying to say, and I also completely forget to finish some of my sentences, and the mere fact that I am drawing makes it somewhat difficult for me to, well, remember to talk. Hopefully this monster turns out as good as the previous one did, because in the one that I wasn't actually recording the audio, well, it did turn out rather good in the end. It started off a bit rough. I forgot that wolves have, ears, and that was making it look kind of stupid, but we got there in the end, or at least I like to think we did. Now, it is a werewolf, so it is going to be nice and ripped. They spend all of their time running around and eating people, so they're very fit. See, this is me immediately forgetting to talk, which I do apologize for. I will try to keep up the banter as I go, but no promises that I will remember to do it the entire time. But what I was trying to say before I forgot what I was trying to say is that the way that we do these videos is I sketch out all of these creatures, and then we go into a time-lapse where I don't talk and some music plays, and during that time-lapse I'm basically going over all of these line drawings and making them a bit more finalized, giving them a bit of color. Got a pretty small neck for a werewolf. And once that's done, we look at the final products, and if we've got any subscriptions from you guys, no, that's not the word. And if we've got any, not subscriptions, submissions. If there's any submissions that you guys have submitted, as you do with submissions, then we show those at the end, and I think we do have some horror ones that have been put in, so we'll definitely have a look at those before the video ends completely. I'm not sure if this is turning out great or terrible. I think, werewolves are one of my favorite horror creatures, even if there aren't that many werewolf movies. Well, not many good werewolf movies. It's not like, well, I suppose ghosts and zombies are the two that there's a huge amount of werewolf. No, that's not a correct sentence. Ghost and zombie movies are the two horror icons that have the most movies. Then probably vampires, and I'm not sure what would really come after that. Maybe mummies? There's quite a few mummy movies, excluding Universal's ones that, even Universal, they have The Mummy, Hand of the Mummy, Tomb of the Mummy, and all of that. But even past that, there's all of the Universal reboots, and then of course there's also just a heap load of people's $2 mummy movies that are also out. Frankenstein doesn't have nearly as many, though he's probably slowly becoming a contender. But as far as werewolves go, there's Teen Wolf, The Wolfman, American Werewolf in London, I think, and I can't really think of that many more good werewolf movies, so if you have them, be sure to let me know, because I'm always looking for more wolf movies. But that's not too bad. It's not as good as the previous the previous videos of it that wasn't a video because some foolish person forgot to record it, but it's similar. I'll show what it looked like last time. That's the failed attempt that turned out to be more like an alligator duck creature. Then I remembered it's supposed to have ears, and that's what we got there. So it did look better in the previous one. Clearly, practice does not make perfect, but it's okay. It's like a $2 cheap ripoff of it, and I'm sure we can improve it in the inking stage, or at least I hope we can, because, well, it's not looking too great. It does have cool hair metal hair. It's what would happen if Kip Winger from Winger became a werewolf? But it's not awful. It's passable. I've given him rather some jeans to hide his wolfy bits, and also to keep on theme of it being a bit of a hair metal werewolf, and it's not so bad. It's not so good either, but let's be less judgmental of my art because, well, I'm not a great artist, so there's no point judging it harshly when there's not much there to judge. And we're definitely still recording, which I'm a bit paranoid about. And let's move straight along to the next monster. Probably my next favorite of the classic horrors is a mummy. That's as in an Egyptian mummy, not as in a mother. Though there is the short-lived horror series which consists of the Mother's Day 1 and Mother's Day 2, where it is actually a real mummy. But that's not what we're drawing today. We're going for an Egyptian mummy. And I remember a while ago when I was in the museum looking at the Egyptian room, a young child asked their parents, "Daddy, why are they called mummies?" And his response was, "Nobody knows." So here's a service announcement. If you don't know the answer to a kid's question, don't tell them nobody knows, because chances are you're just an idiot and people do know. They are called mummies because they undergo the mummification process, obviously, and it's not that nobody knows why they're called it, it's that that particular person didn't, and their poor child is now deceived. Don't be a deceiver. They do walk with their hands stretched out, typically. I'm not really sure why this became a thing. I don't remember it being a thing in Boris Karloff's The Mummy. It's not really a thing in The Hand of the Mummy or The Tomb of the Mummy either. Karis, the mummy from... It's a different mummy, by the way. But Karis, the mummy from those two mummy films, and the ones that follow it even, sort of walks with one hand to his chest rather than him walking with both hands outstretched. And if anything, the monster that walks with its hands out like that is the monster from Frankenstein. And even then, that's not until Ghost of Frankenstein. So I really have no idea why it's become such a pop cultural thing where mummies walk like this. But as it is, well, let's just stick with it because it's in the public zeitgeist now. I'm not sure if that's the correct use of that word, but we'll go with it. This is once again not any particular mummy, it's just a mummy in general, and not exactly a very good one. So I might even try a second attempt of this. That's just the So the bandage is hanging a little loose. I don't know, it doesn't look quite right. So let's try another mummy. You can never have too many mummies. Except for The Mummy 3, the third The Mummy movie. That was one too many mummies. The wife was different, the story wasn't great. I think it was The Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor or something. Not a good movie. Not even a mildly good movie, in fact. But let's not reminisce about that. The third is usually the worst. Look at Spider-Man 3. That was hot trash. So let's not blame The Mummy too much, and instead move straight along to trying to draw the mummy a second time. I'm trying to make it very, grotesquely skinny, because of course it is dead and largely decayed. The mummification process does sort of maintain the skin as a leathery sort of... How do you draw a hand stretching forward? I don't know if I have the skill to do that. How does one do forced perspective? That's got to be larger, doesn't it? Oh no. That is not good. But we'll keep that part. That's pretty grotesque looking. What if we just have it hanging down? Or we could have the arms across the chest as they are on the sarcophaguses. I'm not sure that they're actually stored like that in their sarcophagus. I thought they were, but there's a mummy in Tasmania that's still within its coffin? Within its sarcophagus. Good God, that's a hard word to say. In Tasmania, there is a mummy still within its sarcophagus, and you can sort of see it through x-rays, and it has its arms laying down side by side. So I'm not sure if the mummy famous position of it having its hands over its chest is actually something that's just done on the actual sarcophagus itself, but not done in the mummy. Done on the mummy's posing. If that makes any sense. Let me know in the comments below. I wasn't really paying fully attention to what I was trying to say there, so there's a good chance that it didn't really come across quite right. But this one's looking pretty spooky. It's like the age-old question is, why is the mummy considered the Christmas monster? And that's because it's the only monster that comes wrapped. That terrible joke comes to you from Grin Grimsley. We don't need one coming off of there. Why are mummies considered to be the gangsters of the horror kingdom? Well, it's because of their wrappings, isn't it? That's the exact same joke, but we're getting some miles out of it. More like getting some Niles out of it. That's a geographical joke because the Nile River is in Egypt and gave the Egyptian people their life. Well, that one definitely turned out better. We'll go with that one. Ignore that one. Put that on the banished layer. Over with the other disappointingly failed monsters. Oh no, that's on a different... Okay, I'll put it over with the logo. Failed. Okay. No, not okay yet. Okay, we have a werewolf and a mummy. Better actually save this as we go. Okay, we've now saved it and checked the audio is still recording, so that's good. And it is, and has been. So let's get down to the third of the monsters. Which, I mean, I don't think you can really go past, when you're talking about monsters, the monster, as in the monster from Frankenstein. Everyone calls him Frankenstein, and by everyone I mean most people. And I know that a lot of people get quite angry about the monster from Frankenstein getting referred to as Frankenstein, because they argue that the monster is not called Frankenstein, and that's instead the doctor. And indeed, that is definitely true. The doctor is Frankenstein, and he just makes the monster, and in the novel, and even the movie, well, they never refer to the monster as being called Frankenstein, even though they do in all of the all of the promotional material and whatnot. But I don't think it's not as big a misconception as I think it's made out to be, as after all, if Frankenstein did make the monster, which he did, then in a sense, isn't this a creation of Frankenstein, and so therefore is kind of his child? So I've always interpreted it as being the monster is a Frankenstein because he's made by Frankenstein, and so therefore bears the family name. But that's just my rambling. That's how I've always interpreted it. It's Monster Frankenstein, son of Frankenstein, which makes things confusing because then the second movie in the franchise is actually, well, no, the third movie, the second movie in the franchise is called Bride of Frankenstein, which makes things nice and confusing because it's, of course, not the Bride of Frankenstein, it's the Bride of Frankenstein's monster. And then the third movie in the franchise is called Ghost of Frankenstein. No, I'm getting mixed up. The third movie is called Son of Frankenstein, but it's not referring to Frankenstein's monster. I don't know at what point between the movies that Frankenstein, the scientist, managed to actually go out and start a family, because in the first one, he was getting married, if I remember correctly, and then in the second one, he was getting tricked into creating another monster, and in the third one, well, all of a sudden he has a child. So I don't know when that really happened, but I'm getting way off base. What I was trying to say is I'm not sure that it's such a folly to call Frankenstein's... I've been rambling on this subject for the last few minutes, and I don't even remember what I'm trying to say, but I think it's mainly, the gist of it, is that calling Frankenstein's monster still makes kind of sense. I'm going to be back in a second because I think half the reason I'm rambling here is because it's about 85 degrees in this room, and that's Celsius. So I'm going to turn the air conditioner on, and hopefully I'm going to stop losing my mind and be able to finish a sentence. Okay, we're back. Hopefully the air conditioner is not making too much background noise here, and hopefully now I can finish a sentence without, well, overheating and rambling like a ludicrous person. We are currently drawing Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster, depending on where you fall on the debate. And even though I've been vehemently trying to avoid drawing any copyrighted versions of the monsters, well, this one is very clearly the universal version of it, because they own the somewhat definitive look of the monster. The green look with the bolts in the neck, that's Universal's, and if you're going to have that as your monster, well, you've got to pay them. So, hopefully they don't strike this video down. I think I might be fine with it, because I don't think I've drawn it well enough that Universal would ever recognize it as their monster. But we'll see how we go. And that's why if you watch Hammer's version of Frankenstein, the monster looks entirely different. He needs to have a very thick brow. And that's also why if you watch the Munsters, Herman Munster from the Munsters, the father of the Munsters clan, does look like Frankenstein's monster from the classic Universal movie. And that's because the Munsters is actually owned by Universal Studios, so they can just do what they want. It doesn't look great here. And I also don't really remember what kind of clothing Frankenstein wears. I assume not a gym shirt or a wife beater or anything. I know I got his boots right. I know Frankenstein has those large boots that make him look even taller than he is. But aside from that, I think he's got flared jeans. This is going to become Disco Frankenstein. And if it becomes Disco Frankenstein, maybe we're slightly less likely to get sued by Universal Studios. So he definitely has flared jeans, a peace sign on his shirt, because he's a fun-loving Frankenstein, and some Beatles glasses. Yeah. That's fun-loving Frankenstein there. That's, hopefully copyright-safe, fun-loving Frankenstein. So that's, oh, he's way too tall. His neck looks wrong. he has a really goofy haircut, and that was before I even started to make him fun-loving Frankenstein. That was while I was still attempting him to make him look like Frankenstein. I think overall, I would describe him as not a great interpretation. I also kind of smushed him there, but it didn't make it any worse, which is just insulting. But we'll fix it up when we get to the final versions of it. So we've now got fun-loving Frankenstein, a werewolf, not Wolfman, just a regular werewolf, not played by who played the Wolfman? This is where Grim's flashing up the answer on the screen, and, well, good job, Grim, but you've got time to think about it, and I dare say maybe even Google on your side, so lay off. Someone junior. Not Robert Downey Jr., that's for sure. So we've got Frankenstein, a werewolf, a mummy, a very short mummy compared to the others, but, well, I guess he's the most human out of all three of them, so that's fine. Well, actually, I suppose Frankenstein's the most human out of all three of them because he's multiple humans, and so just mathematically he's the most human out of all three of them. But let's move along to the next monster, and I'm going to keep up the classics here and go for Dracula. And I, of course, can say Dracula because he's not owned by Hammer or Universal, because he's from the classic novel by Bram Stoker, but I by right shouldn't be making him look like the versions in those two movies, and something tells me, well, I might be making him look a little bit like them, or at least trying my best to, just because, well, as I said in my review of Nosferatu, both those movies, the Hammer version and the Universal version, really did manage to define the look of Dracula that everyone knows these days, and if you go into any cheap costume store, well, they're not going to be based on Bram Stoker's version of Dracula, are they? They're going to be based off of the movies, even if they're not calling them that. Actually, that might be a fun video to make, going around to the cheap stores that are all selling Halloween costumes and seeing what they're all naming their characters, because they all kind of, this is looking terrible. They all kind of go for copyright avoiding names. So instead of Star Wars, you have, instead of a stormtrooper, or you have space soldier, and instead of a Jedi, you have a fantasy space wizard. And it's all very fun to look at and see what they try to go for, despite blatantly ripping off of the look. I mean, I don't think they're going to be able to hold it up in court and say, No, it's definitely not supposed to be a stormtrooper. It's a fantasy space soldier, because I mean, I'm fairly sure the look of the stormtrooper is also pretty heavily copyrighted. But I digress. His head's far too big. The best version of Dracula is, of course, Frankenfurter from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But we're not going with him today. We're just going for the classic look, sort of a combination between the Christopher Lee one and the... Oh my lord, my memory is just completely failing me as soon as I try to remember names. This is what happens when you're trying to record, draw, and remember movie facts as you go. It turns into a bit of a mess. But I think one of the biggest things about Dracula is his cape. Or is that Batman I'm thinking of? And, I'm trying to make it a bit like Wings here. After all, he is part vampire. Christopher Lee and Bela Lugosi. There we go. I knew if I wasted enough time of this video trying to remember his name, I would get there. There's always an argument about who plays the best Dracula between Lee and Lugosi. It's sort of like your, Captain Kirk versus Picard argument. Although even more heated because at least Picard and Kirk weren't the same character. Shatner and Patrick Stewart weren't both portraying Captain Kirk. But when it comes to Dracula, they're portraying the exact same character, and people argue all the time who plays the best one. Personally, I do prefer Lugosi, but that's just a personal preference. I don't think Dracula has flared genes. I do think he has a brooch here of some sort, though. And I really don't remember how either of their bloody hairstyles are. I'm gonna make it a bit bat-like, because once again, they are both partly bats. And kind of evil leering eyes. This is him slightly in his bat form. And then goofy bat things. I'm going to claim that I'll fix it in the inking version, but let's be honest. When it comes to me drawing faces, it doesn't get much better than that. So while I will say that I'll fix it, I'm probably not going to. I also think he has a bit of a high color. That's a classic vampire trait. I'm not sure why vampires have high colors, because if anything, they're the only ones that don't need high colors. I mean, if all of their victims had high colors, it's a hard word to say. It sounds like color. If all of their victims had high colors, it would be far more difficult for vampires to eat their victims. If anyone doesn't need a high color, it's probably vampires themselves. So maybe they wear it out of irony. I'm not sure. But I think even though they don't have flared pants, they do sort of have flared sleeves because it's that aristocratic look. There we go. That's not too bad. It's not good, but I think if you looked at it and were told it was supposed to be Dracula, you could probably think, wow, that child did a really good job of drawing Dracula. Just don't tell them that it was me that did it. But then again, on the other hand, I am, once again, dead, so I suppose for a dead person, any of these drawings are pretty good. Let's get on to the next one, though. We've now had fun-loving Frankenstein, a werewolf, in fact, a mummy, a Dracula, and now let's get on to... Well, I mean, we've got to have the classic at some point. Let's get on to just a spooky ghost. And what exactly, you might ask, does a spooky ghost look like? To answer that question, I really don't know. I've never seen a ghost. I write horror stories all the time about ghosts, but I've never actually tried to draw one, and I've never seen one. There's the classic, Charlie Brown ghosts, which are just, sheets with a bunch of holes in them, depending on the character wearing it. And then there's the more spooky ghost, where it's sort of a person that's a bit translucent, with flesh falling off, but at that point you might as well be drawing a zombie. I guess the Scooby-Doo style one, where it's once again a person but translucent, is good. I don't know. Let's just go for a sort of a bedsheet one. I played Pac-Man on the Atari 2600, and that had some ghosts in it. They looked okay. Might go for something like that. Sort of a bit of a scary face. Soulless eyes. Blah. That's the noise that ghosts make. They have teeth, but I'm not sure if ghost teeth can hurt you, because after all, they move through you. And so if they bit you, it probably wouldn't do much damage. Let's give it lady legs. When in doubt, give it some really big legs and maybe some high heels. You might be thinking one leg is bigger than the other. That's not the case. It's just that one of them is closer to the screen. I'm not a bad artist. I'm just doing perspective, so maybe be a little less judgmental. I guess I could take it to the 9th level. And also, why are the knees up there? The knees are up there, and then it just goes on forever. Oh, dear me. This is the ghost of a horrifically deformed lady by the looks of it. With claws and, that's the handbag. And, on this side we have a robotic claw. Actually, it's looking more like a summer dress that's come to life. Give it a bit of a... one of those smart summer hats that keep off the rays. Because even if you're undead, or dead in fact, you don't want to get cancer, so keep those rays off. And that's basically, as far as I'm aware, that's how a ghost looks. It's wearing these same red boots that I always wear when Grim decides to kill me. So I can somewhat relate to this ghost. And there you have it. That's the ghost of summer walks. So far we're doing really good with the classic monsters. We've nailed all the major ones. Summertime Frankenstein down to summer walk ghosts. For a moment there, I thought we had lost them, but they had just gone off the screen, so that's fine. And if we're doing ghosts, we might as well also move on and do zombies. Hopefully make them look a bit more scary than the ghost turned out to be, but we'll see how it goes. And we're still got a good amount of parchment left, so that's a good start. It's going to be a horrifically skinny one again, because, you know, these are undead, so it makes sense that the mummy, the zombie, and the vampire are all going to be pretty skinny. Just because, well, when you're dead, you don't get that much of a chance to eat. So let's go for really grotesquely wide, skinny hips. He's lost an arm because sometimes, you know, since they don't really have functioning brains anymore, so zombies can be rather forgetful. And this one's misplaced his arm. It happens. Oh, he should be holding his hand. That's what we want. So there's the other part of his severed arm there. There we go. That's nice and spooky. So his arm's fallen off, but he's not quite ready to give up on it. He's still holding on to it. And sort of grotesquely sunken eyes. Almost like a skull, really. Almost like a skull, really. Sink down the head a little bit. Give him like he's got the hair of a 42-year-old guy who's starting to suffer from male pattern baldness, but not quite ready to give up on it. So it's holding in there, but it's not really fooling anyone. It's going to be a shirtless zombie. It's deep into the zombie apocalypse, so the zombies have already forsaken clothes and really just moved on. You know, humanity is still grasping onto the last bastions of civilized living, so they're still running around wearing clothes, but the zombies, they don't really see the point, so they're sort of just going around free in the nude. I think most of your delicate organs like your eyes and other, well, they fall off when you become dead and buried, so they don't really have much to cover up anyway. So there's no real need for decency. Some grotesque zombie feet. I think I still made his legs a little bit too, well, the left one's not too bad, but the right one. There we go, that's a bit more grotesque. And before the video gets flagged for it being horror in nature or something, basically every time we have a video uploaded, if we've got Halloween or horror in the title, even if it's a review of Scooby-Doo or something, it still gets flagged for it being unsafe for most advertisers. So it'll be interesting to see if my bad drawings are considered too horrific for most advertisers. The perspective here is not great, but it is a zombie, so any mistake I've made, just pretend it's due to it being a rotting corpse rather than me being untalented. And I think that worked out pretty good, that one. Maybe a few more like... Don't want to make it too much like the... Don't want to make it too much like the Mummy, but still have a bit of a, grotesque flesh hanging off here and there. Yeah, that's pretty horrific. Maybe a bit of a wound there. Festering wound. I'm actually, I'm not too disappointed by that. That's a pretty good mummy. They should bring me in for Walking Dead Season 18 or whatever they're up to, and maybe I can revive it with my horrific mummy I've just drawn. And we're still definitely recording both on the video and the audio side. So let's have a sip of tea and move on to the next monster. And let's move straight along to one of my own personal monsters, my co-host Grimgrindle himself, who for most of the year is a pretty okay guy, but when it comes to the October season, especially on the 9th, well, he decides to brutally murder me. And, I feel like that's a pretty good reason to put him in this Halloween lineup. His powers are somewhat vaguely defined. He seems to have the ability to teleport sometimes, is pretty good at stabbing, and, also, whenever he decides to kill me, whatever footwear I'm wearing is suddenly magically transformed into high-heel red boots that make it really difficult to run away. That's a bit of a unique ability that I've not seen in any horror movie, so I'm not sure if he came up with that one himself or not, but it's, it works pretty darn well. I'm not sure if you've ever tried to run in high-heel shoes, but it's rather difficult, and the 3 or so times that I've tried to run in high-heel shoes, it's not worked out for me, and I have been murdered. Oh dear. It's all looking a bit blurry because I drew it too small and then tried to blow it up, but that's fine, we'll fix that in inking. And, if it does end up looking a bit ridiculous, well, at least it's only grim. Let's see. He doesn't really have flared pants, but they're not tight either. Then he usually has boots that go over top of them. They kind of tuck into his pants like that. You work with someone all year round and then try to draw them, and suddenly you can't really remember how they look. I would say that it's embarrassing, but considering he murders me, well, I don't really care how he feels about me at the moment. He has long sleeves and a purple vest. Or a cranberry, maybe. He also usually has a pocket watch in. He's not been wearing it lately. I think it's broken or something. His neck is not nearly that long. Bring the head down a bit. Oh dear me. I've also made him far too skinny. But don't tell him I said that. Okay. Then he's got black gloves. He's got black gloves that are more expensive and far more comfortable looking than my gloves, which I'm somewhat offended by. My gloves are kind of, cheap costume gloves, and then his are expensive leather driving gloves, so I'm not really sure how he got those from management, and I got what I got. But he also gets to kill me every year, and I get to get killed, so clearly there's a bit of a unevenness to our partnership here. I bet he gets paid more than me as well. Okay, facial features. I'm not really usually very good at facial features, but I feel like for Grim I can make an exception because they're nice and simple. And there we have it, my own personal murderer, horror figure who kills me every 9th of October. I really should just set that date on my calendar and make sure I'm overseas next time. He's got a pocket there. Not quite as good as the version of it that we got the artist whose name will have flashed up on the screen to draw for our profiles, but not terrible. I'm quite happy with that. He looks suitably scary. And we've probably got room for, I would say, 2 more or 1 more monster. We don't really have much room down there. I don't know, maybe I'll draw a big monster down there and just make it take up the space. But let's see, Frankenstein, werewolves, mummies, vampires, ghosts, zombies, Grim. What's left in the classic horror lineup? I'm trying to remember what bargain bin costumes you usually see at Halloween parties. I could draw, Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger and all that, but I feel like Grim already kind of covered those in the Halloween introduction video. We didn't wear Freddy Krueger, but either way. How about I go for a bit of a different, more recent horror monster in the form of a xenomorph. If I remember how to draw them. They're sort of weird creatures that don't really line up with our anatomy at all. I think they've got reverse articulated legs. They don't have reverse articulated feet, though. I think it's more like a... Not looking great down there, that's for sure. The rest of it's not too bad, though. I was complaining earlier that I have difficulties drawing faces, and the xenomorphs don't have faces, so that's very much appreciated. They sort of do have a secondary... Actually, I think their mouths, their heads kind of extend further like that, and they do have some sort of tail, don't they? I think it's a barbed tail, in fact. Very demonic. Not quite that barbed, but we'll go with it. And they sort of have... Oh dear me. I cannot tell if this is working out really well or really badly. Oh, it's not awful. And then they've got secondary mouths, where a second head comes out, looking all grotesque. And it's got a similar little, cute little head to it that also has a mouth. So this one's definitely not a generic monster. I mean, this is aliens through and through. But it's not Halloween without a xenomorph about. And a xenomorph appears in the Ninja Turtles, so if they can get away with it, hopefully we can. That's in the 80s cartoon, not in the movies or anything. Might bring this arm down rather than it being sticking out there, because it kind of interferes with the mouth there. There you go. A xenomorph. I'm not really sure I'm happy with how the tail came out. It's sort of very right-angled. But we'll, as I always say, we'll fix it when we come to the finalized drawing of it, even though I rarely do. So there we go. Xenomorph as well as all the others. So far, so good. Probably room for just the one more down the bottom now. I can move it around and make it look like it's trying to get Grim. Take that, Grim! I've sicked a Xenomorph on you. Serves you right. For killing me 4 times. Okay. Room for one more down the bottom. We'll have to keep it pretty small because there's not a huge space here. But I think being Halloween, we should probably go for the most well-known Halloween monster ever. The Great Pumpkin. The Great Pumpkin is, of course, the patriarch or matriarch. I'm not really sure that pumpkins have genders, but it's basically the main monster of Halloween. We see it presented or represented, moreover, in all of the carved pumpkins, and sometimes people worship it in the pumpkin patch while waiting for Halloween to arrive. So, I think it's probably a pretty good one to end on. Big old smile. Kind of looks like me. Except I don't have teeth. I bet the Great Pumpkin would have far less trouble chewing than I do. We were going to do cooking videos for a while on channel Grin and Grim, but well, both Grim and I realized that neither of us can actually eat. So that kind of, it threw a bit of a spanner in the works. Not to worry, though. You know, these things happen. And if I centralize the Great Pumpkin a little bit more, I can probably give it some kind of scary tentacles coming off. I don't know if you've seen the Simpson episode, but there's an episode where they parody the Charlie Brown episode, The Great Pumpkin, and they make it really horrific and it eats a bunch of people. I do recommend it. I know that a lot of people these days don't like The Simpsons, but they still occasionally come through with some pretty good episodes. These spheres are going to be more pumpkins, so don't get too confused by them. And also, Grim and I saw that movie, The House with the Clock in Its Wall, or I think that's what it's called. It wasn't a great name for the movie, and it wasn't a great movie either, but it also had killer pumpkins, so that it had that going for it. There we go. And give each of them some evil eyes. As I forget that I'm supposed to still be talking. I'm too busy drawing pumpkins. Give me a break. These will, of course, become more detailed pumpkins when we get to the inking stage. At the moment, I'm just trying to flesh out the idea a bit. And we're almost there. That one's the best one at the bottom. Okay, there we have it. So, we now have ourselves our Halloween drawings ready to be cleaned up in the inking and coloring stage, which will all be time-lapse with music playing over the top, and then I'll come back and talk and show the final version, and then we'll have a look at ones that you guys have submitted. But until then, we've got the Funtime Frankenstein, the werewolf, the mummy that's much smaller than all of the others, but whatever. We've got the Dracula, we've got the hidden behind all of these layers and stuff. We've got the ghost with robotic hand and ready for a summer walk. We've got the zombie, which I think turned out best out of all of them so far. We've got Grim looking menacing and ready to kill me once again next October. We've got the Xenomorph, which actually, it turned out pretty good for how long I spent on it. And then down the bottom, we've got the Great Pumpkin from Charlie Brown. So that's all of them, and I'll see you after the time-lapse. And with that, our lineup of Halloween monsters, or should I say, mashup of Halloween monsters, or even more so, dare I say, our monster mash, is nice and completed. And I've gotta say that for the most part, I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. I did have to, as I'm sure you can tell with Grim and the Werewolf and Funtime Frankenstein, have to kind of phone in a couple, as when I got to the inking stage, I realized I had far less time than I had planned to, but overall I'm pretty happy with how they came out, and I've got to say that I'm especially happy with the Mummy, the Zombie, the Xenomorph, Summertime Ghost, and the Great Pumpkin. Overall, I've got to say that they definitely look suitably spooky, and as a Halloween video, I hope they've helped you get into the Halloween spirit. And so let's now immediately jump to the art that other people have been kind enough to share with us, which begins with what appears to be me looking a little bit worse for wear. And while the viewer-submitted art continues to flow, I'm just going to take this moment to plug one of our other shows, Beyond the Rusted Gate. Beyond the Rusted Gate is a radio horror-style show written by yours truly, with sound editing by Grim and read by the great Sir Darkwell Bled. There's currently 3 episodes of it, with the next one going up this Saturday, so if you're looking for something to keep you nice and spooked this Halloween, then definitely make sure you have a listen to our very own radio horror-style show, Beyond the Rusted Gate. And if you would like your own artwork showed off at the end of the next episode of Art with Grin, then make sure you send it to Grim on Twitter or post it in the channel Grin and Grim Discord, the Echo Chamber.